The silence inside the gilded cage was louder than a gunshot. 1 second. Dante Moretti, the man who owned half of Chicago and feared absolutely no one, was laughing, towering over the petite waitress who had dared to spill a drop of whiskey on his Brioni suit. The next second, the air left the room. There was a blur of motion, a sickening crack of bone meeting floor, and the Don of the Moretti family was on his back, staring up at the ceiling lights, gasping for air. The waitress stood over him, smoothing her apron, her eyes colder than the ice in his glass. "I warned you," she whispered. And that was the moment Dante knew. The hunt had just begun. The VIP section of the gilded cage smelled of old money, expensive leather, and fear. It was a Saturday night in downtown Chicago, and the club was packed with the city's elite, corrupt politicians, hedge fund managers, and the predators who fed on them. Sienna Blake adjusted the collar of her uniform, keeping her head down as she balanced a tray of crystal tumblers. She hated this part of the job. The high-end clientele didn't tip better. They just demanded more of your soul. She was 24, with dark hair pulled back into a severe bun, and a demeanor that usually screamed invisible. That was the point. In her line of work, or at least her former line of work, invisibility kept you alive. "More scotch, now!" The voice was deep, gravelly, and laced with the kind of arrogance that only came from a lifetime of never being told no. Sienna didn't need to look up to know who it was. Dante Moretti, the capo dei capi, the man the FBI had been trying to pin down for a decade. He was sitting in the center booth like a king on a throne, flanked by 4 bodyguards who looked like they chewed concrete for breakfast. Sienna moved efficiently, sliding through the crowd. She placed the fresh bottle of Macallan 25 on the low marble table. "Your scotch, Mr. Moretti." Dante didn't look at her. He was busy lighting a cigar, the flame illuminating the sharp angles of his face. High cheekbones, a scar running through his left eyebrow, and eyes the color of burnt espresso. He was undeniably handsome, in a way that set off alarm bells in Sienna's brain. "You're new," Dante said, smoke curling from his lips. He still hadn't looked at her. "Yes, sir. 2 weeks," Sienna replied, her voice steady. She reached for the empty glasses to clear the table. "Leave them," Dante commanded, finally turning his gaze to her. It felt physical, like a weight pressing on her chest. He scanned her, not with lust, but with the dissecting stare of a predator assessing prey. "What's your name?" "Sienna." "Sienna," he repeated, tasting the word. "You have steady hands, Sienna. Most people shake when they serve me." "I'm just doing my job, sir." Dante smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron. The bodyguard stiffened, sensing the shift in the air. "You're not just a waitress, are you? You walk too quietly. You check the exits every time you enter the room." Sienna's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of confusion. "I don't know what you mean. Please let go." "I think you do," Dante said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I think you're hiding something, and I hate secrets." He yanked her arm, pulling her off balance. The tray in her other hand tipped. It was a rookie mistake, forced by his aggression. The heavy crystal glass slid off and crashed onto the table, shattering. Amber liquid splashed across the lapel of his $3,000 suit. The music in the club seemed to stop. The chatter in the VIP section died instantly. Every eye turned to the booth. Dante looked down at the stain, then back up at Sienna. His expression was unreadable, which was worse than anger. He slowly released her wrist and stood up. He was tall, well over 6 feet, looming over her. "You clumsy little fool," one of the bodyguards, a brute named Luca, snarled, stepping forward. Dante held up a hand to stop him. "No, Luca, she didn't mean it." He took a step closer to Sienna, invading her personal space. "Did you, Sienna?" "It was an accident," she said, her voice dropping an octave. The submissive waitress act was slipping. She could feel the adrenaline flooding her system, the old instincts waking up. Distance, leverage, strike points. An accident, Dante mocked. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were hot against her skin. You know, in my world, accidents have consequences. You ruined my suit. How do you plan to pay for it? A waitress salary won't cover a button on this jacket. I'll have it cleaned, Sienna said tightly. Dante laughed, a dark, rich sound that echoed in the silent VIP area. Cleaned? You think this is about laundry? He leaned down, his face inches from hers. You disrespected me in my own house. You think because you're a woman, I'll let it slide? You think you're tough because you can hold my stare? He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. Prove it. Prove you're worth the air you're breathing right now. Beg for forgiveness, and maybe I won't have you thrown out the back door. Sienna stared at him. The heat of his hand on her face was infuriating. She saw the amusement in his eyes. He was playing with her. He wanted to break her spirit just to see the pieces fall. Something inside Sienna snapped. The carefully constructed persona of the timid waitress evaporated. "Take your hand off me," she said clearly. The crowd gasped. Luca's jaw dropped. Dante's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine surprise replacing the amusement. "Excuse me?" Dante challenged, his grip tightening on her chin. "I don't think I heard you correctly." "I said," Sienna repeated, her voice turning into cold steel, "take your hand off me, or I will break it." Dante Moretti laughed. It was a genuine, incredulous laugh. He looked around at his men, gesturing to Sienna as if she were a performing animal. "Did you hear that?" Dante asked the room. "She's going to break my hand." He looked back at her, his grin vanishing, replaced by a look of pure menace. "Do it then. Try." He didn't think she would. He thought he was untouchable. He was the wolf of Chicago. Nobody touched Dante Moretti. Sienna didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, she brought her left hand up, clamping it over Dante's wrist that was holding her chin. At the same time, she stepped into his space, driving her hip into his center of gravity. It was a classic Krav Maga redirection, but executed with the speed of a viper. She twisted his wrist outward, locking the joint against the natural range of motion. Dante's eyes shot wide open as pain, sharp and blinding, shot up his arm. Before he could even process the pain, Sienna pivoted. She used his own momentum against him, sweeping his leg while cranking his wrist down. Crack. It wasn't a break, but the sound of cartilage popping under extreme pressure. Dante, the man who terrified the city, went airborne. His expensive Italian shoes left the floor. He slammed onto the hardwood with a thud that shook the nearby tables. Sienna didn't stop there. She dropped a knee onto his chest, knocking the wind out of him, and pressed her forearm against his throat, pinning him to the floor. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. For a heartbeat, the world was frozen. Dante stared up at her, wheezing, his eyes locked on hers. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at a soldier. "I asked you nicely," Sienna hissed, her face inches from his. "Don't touch me." "Boss!" Luca screamed, the spell breaking. Sienna sensed the movement before she heard it. She rolled off Dante just as Luca's heavy boot stomped the spot where her head had been. She sprang to her feet, creating distance, her hands raised in a defensive combat stance. Dante coughed, clutching his throat, and rolled onto his side. "Wait," he rasped. But his men were already moving. 3 of them rushed her. Sienna didn't run. She grabbed a heavy champagne bottle from the nearest table. As the first guard lunged, a man twice her weight, she sidestepped his clumsy haymaker and smashed the bottle over his head. Glass exploded. He went down like a sack of cement. The second guard hesitated, shocked by the violence. That hesitation cost him. Sienna kicked his kneecap, a sickening crunch echoing through the room, followed by a palm strike to his nose that sent him reeling backward, blood spraying. Luca, the largest of them, pulled a switchblade. The gleam of silver caught the strobe lights. "Enough!" Dante roared. He struggled to his feet, one hand rubbing his bruised throat, the other holding his aching wrist. His suit was ruined, his hair was disheveled, and he looked absolutely murderous. Luca froze, the knife hovering in the air. "She assaulted you, boss. I'm going to gut her." "I said stand down," Dante bellowed. The command cracked like a whip. Luca lowered the knife, stepping back reluctantly. The VIP section was dead silent. Guests were shrinking into their booths, terrified of witnessing a mob execution. Dante walked slowly towards Sienna. He stopped 5 feet away, breathing heavily. He looked at his fallen men, then back at her. The anger in his eyes was warring with something else. Curiosity? Respect? No. It was darker than that. It was obsession. "Who sent you?" Dante demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "The Russians? The cartel? Who are you?" Sienna straightened her apron, though the gesture was absurd given the chaos around them. "Nobody sent me. I needed a job." "A waitress who fights like a Mossad agent?" Dante stepped closer, ignoring the warning glare she gave him. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't care what you believe," Sienna said. "I quit." She turned on her heel and started walking towards the exit. "If you walk out that door," Dante called out, his voice echoing, "you're a dead woman. You think you can humiliate me and just leave? I will find you, Sienna. There is nowhere on this earth you can hide from me." Sienna paused at the velvet rope. She looked back over her shoulder. Her expression was tired, almost sad. "You can try, Dante, but be careful. The next time you come at me, I won't stop at your wrist." She disappeared into the crowd of the main dance floor. Dante stood there, watching the empty space where she had been. His wrist throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pain. He brought his hand up to his face, smelling the faint trace of her perfume, vanilla and something metallic, like gun oil. Luca stepped up beside him, eyeing the door. "I'll get the boys. We'll scrape her off the pavement outside." "No," Dante said, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across his face. He adjusted his jacket, wiping a speck of blood from his lapel. "Let her go." "Boss?" Luca looked confused. "She disrespected the family. She put you on the floor." "She did," Dante murmured, "and she's the first interesting thing that has happened to me in 5 years." He turned to Luca, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "Find out who she really is. Turn this city upside down. I don't want her dead, Luca. I want her brought to me." "Alive?" "Alive," Dante confirmed. "I want to be the one to break her." The city of Chicago was a grid of steel and shadow, and Dante Moretti owned every inch of it. Or so he thought. 2 hours after the incident at the Gilded Cage, Dante sat in his office at the top of the Moretti Tower. The room was a fortress of glass, overlooking the glittering skyline. His wrist was wrapped in a compression bandage, a throbbing reminder of the woman who had vanished into the night. "Tell me you have something," Dante growled, not turning away from the window. Nero, Dante's head of intelligence, sat at a massive mahogany desk, his fingers flying across a laptop keyboard. Nero was a man who lived in the digital shadows, a former NSA contractor who had realized that organized crime paid better and asked fewer questions. "It's not making sense, boss," Nero muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I ran facial recognition on the security footage from the club. I cross-referenced her with every database we have. DMV, state police, FBI watch lists, even Interpol. And she doesn't exist," Nero said, turning the laptop screen around. "The name, Sienna Blake, is a ghost. The social security number she gave the club manager belongs to a woman who died in a car accident in Ohio 4 years ago. Her address is a drop box in a laundromat in Wicker Park. No credit history, no digital footprint, nothing." Dante turned, his interest sharpening into something razor-edged. "A professional. A high-level one," Nero agreed. "The way she moved. That wasn't self-defense class. That was military grade, special forces or intelligence. And the way she scrubbed her exit? The cameras outside the club malfunctioned for exactly 3 minutes right after she left. She jammed them." Dante walked over to the desk, staring at the frozen frame of Sienna from the club's interior camera. In the grainy image, her eyes were focused, predatory. She looked less like a waitress and more like a soldier behind enemy lines. She's not just hiding from me, Dante realized aloud. She's hiding from someone else. Someone bigger. If she's that good, she's already gone, Nero said. She probably has a burner car and a second identity lined up. She could be halfway to Canada by now. No, Dante said, shaking his head. She's not running. I saw it in her eyes. She's on a mission. She was working at the Gilded Cage for a reason. Who else was in the VIP section tonight? Nero tapped a few keys. Senator Hawkins, the CEO of Arion Tech, and Viktor Volkov. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Viktor Volkov was the head of the Bratva, the Russian syndicate that had been encroaching on Moretti territory for months. A truce existed between them, but it was as fragile as glass. She was watching Volkov, Dante whispered. She wasn't serving drinks, she was doing reconnaissance. Dante grabbed his jacket. The pain in his wrist was forgotten, replaced by the thrill of the hunt. Track Volkov's movements. If she's hunting him, that's where we'll find her. Boss, if she's hitting Volkov, that's a war, Nero warned. If we intervene... I don't care about the war, Dante said, checking the magazine of his custom .45 caliber pistol. I want the woman. No one humiliates me and walks away. No one. Sienna, or Sienna as she was currently known, was not running to Canada. She was currently crouching on a rusted fire escape 4 stories above an alleyway in the meatpacking district. The cold wind whipped at her face, but she didn't flinch. She had changed out of her waitress uniform into tactical gear, black cargo pants, boots, and a heavy hooded jacket. In her hand, she held a suppressed Sig Sauer P-226. Dante Moretti had been a variable she hadn't calculated. His arrogance had forced her hand, blowing her cover. She cursed herself for losing her temper. Breaking the Don's wrist felt good, undeniably, but it was sloppy tradecraft. Now she had the Italian mob looking for her and her primary target still in the wind. Her earpiece crackled. Target is moving. 2 SUVs, southbound on Racine. Copy that, Sienna whispered. She didn't have a team. The voice in her ear was a pre-recorded police scanner algorithm she'd hacked. She was alone. She had been alone since the agency burned her. She slid down the ladder, hitting the pavement silently. Her target was Viktor Volkov, the file she needed, the one that would prove her innocence and expose the corruption in her former unit, was in Volkov's possession. He was meeting a buyer tonight to sell the encrypted drive. She needed to intercept him before the sale. Sienna sprinted through the alley, cutting through a chain-link fence she had pre-cut hours ago. She emerged onto a side street, just as 2 black Escalades roared past. Volkov. She ran to a parked motorcycle, a nondescript Ducati she'd stolen 2 days prior, and kicked it to life. She peeled out, keeping her distance, tracking the taillights. They led her to an abandoned shipyard by the river. It was a classic drop spot. Isolated. No cameras. Perfect for a murder. Sienna ditched the bike and moved in on foot, using the shipping containers for cover. She saw the Russians setting up a perimeter. Volkov was there, a bear of a man in a fur-collared coat, holding a silver briefcase. She checked her angles. 6 hostiles. She could take 3 before they located her. It was risky. She raised her weapon, aiming for the guard nearest to Volkov. She squeezed the trigger. Click. Sienna froze. Her gun hadn't misfired. The slide was locked. Someone had tampered with it? Impossible. She checked it constantly. Then she felt the cold steel of a barrel against the back of her neck. Drop it, a voice said. It wasn't Russian. It was Italian. Sienna slowly lowered her gun to the ground. She raised her hands. Turn around, slowly. She turned. Standing there, looking impeccably dressed despite the late hour, was Dante Moretti. Behind him were 6 of his men, weapons raised. Hello, Sienna, Dante said, a smirk playing on his lips. I told you I'd find you. You followed Volkov, she realized, her mind racing. You knew I'd be here. I knew you were too smart to run, Dante corrected, and too angry to quit. Before she could reply, a spotlight from the shipyard crane blinded them. How touching! A booming voice echoed from the center of the yard. Viktor Volkov was standing on a crate, surrounded by 10 more men who had emerged from the shadows. They were holding assault rifles. The Italian prince and the little spy, Volkov laughed. I should thank you, Moretti. You brought her right to me. Dante's eyes narrowed. He looked at Sienna, then at Volkov. He realized instantly that they were both in a kill box. The Russians had set a trap. Did you know about this? Dante hissed at her. If I did, would I be standing here with no ammo? Sienna snapped. Kill them both, Volkov ordered. The air erupted. Bullets pinged off the shipping container next to Dante's head. He lunged forward, tackling Sienna to the ground, just as a hail of gunfire shredded the space where she had been standing. Get to cover! Hoa! Dante roared to his men. It was chaos. The Italians returned fire, pistols popping against the automatic roar of the Russian AK-47S. Dante and Sienna rolled behind a stack of steel beams. They were pinned down. You ruined my operation! Sienna yelled over the gunfire, checking her boot for her backup knife. I saved your life, Dante shouted back, firing 2 shots over the barricade. He ducked as concrete chips rained down on them. You're welcome, by the way. I had it under control. You had a jammed gun and a death wish. Dante looked at her, his eyes wild with adrenaline. Can you fight? Sienna looked at him. The animosity was still there, but survival came first. Give me a gun. Dante hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he pulled a backup Glock 19 from his waistband and handed it to her. Don't make me regret this. Sienna checked the chamber. Cover me. I'm going left. Left is suicide, Dante argued. Left is the flank, she corrected. Keep them busy. Without waiting for permission, she bolted. She moved like a phantom, low and fast. Dante gritted his teeth and stood up, firing blindly at the Russians to draw their attention. Over here, you ugly bastards, Dante yelled. The Russians focused their fire on him. It gave Sienna the 3 seconds she needed. She slid under a truck chassis, coming up on the blind side of Volkov's formation. She didn't hesitate. Double tap, double tap. 2 Russian gunmen dropped before they knew she was there. The dynamic of the fight shifted instantly. The Russians panicked, their flank exposed. Dante's men pressed the advantage, moving forward. Volkov realized the tide had turned. He grabbed the briefcase and ran toward a waiting boat at the dock. He's running! Sienna yelled, sprinting after him. Dante was right behind her. They reached the dock just as the boat's engine roared to life. Volkov was pulling away. Sienna raised the Glock, aiming at the driver. But the distance was too great. The boat sped into the dark water of the Chicago River. Damn it! She screamed, kicking a bollard. She spun around, chest heaving, to find Dante standing 5 feet away. The gunfight was over. The surviving Russians were either dead or fled. Dante's men began to circle her, weapons raised. Sienna tightened her grip on the gun Dante had given her. She was outnumbered again. Easy, Dante said to his men. He walked toward her, his hands open. The gun, Sienna, give it to me. I can't do that, she said, her voice tight. I'm walking out of here. You're not, Dante said calmly. Volkov knows your face now. My men know your face. The cops will be here in 2 minutes. You have nowhere to go. He stopped just inside her personal space. The adrenaline of the battle was fading, replaced by that heavy, magnetic tension from the club. Come with me, Dante said. It wasn't a command this time. It was an offer. We have a common enemy, and you owe me a suit. Sienna weighed her options. Alone, she was hunted by the Russians and the authorities. With Dante, she was sleeping with the devil, but a devil with resources. She engaged the safety on the Glock and reversed it, holding it out handle first. Dante took the weapon, his fingers brushing hers. He didn't pull away. He looked down at her, a smear of gunpowder on his cheek, looking more dangerous and alive than he ever had in the safety of his VIP booth. Smart choice, he murmured. Now get in the car. We have a lot to discuss. The ride to Dante's penthouse was silent. Sienna sat in the back of the armored SUV, flanked by Luca, who looked like he wanted to strangle her, and another guard. Dante sat in the front, on the phone, barking orders in rapid-fire Italian to clean up the mess at the shipyard. When they arrived at the Moretti Tower, they didn't go to the office. They took a private elevator to the penthouse suite. It was a sprawling space of marble floors, modern art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the city. "Leave us," Dante commanded as they stepped inside. Luca hesitated. "Boss, she's dangerous. You saw what she did to the Russians." "I saw," Dante said, unbuttoning his ruined jacket and tossing it onto a white leather sofa. "If she wanted to kill me, she would have done it in the car. Get out!" Luca glared at Sienna before retreating to the elevator. The doors slid shut, leaving them alone. Sienna stood in the center of the room, feeling exposed. This wasn't a prison cell, but it was a cage, nonetheless. Dante walked to a wet bar and poured 2 drinks. He didn't ask what she wanted. He just handed her a glass of bourbon. "Drink," he said. "It helps with the adrenaline crash." Sienna took the glass, but didn't drink. She set it on the coaster. "You want answers? Ask." Dante sipped his drink, watching her over the rim. "I know your name isn't Sienna. I know you're trained. I know you're hunting Volkov. What I want to know is, why? That's classified." Dante laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Classified? You're in my living room drinking my liquor after using my gun to kill my enemies. We are way past classified." He walked closer, his voice dropping. "Volkov had a briefcase. You were willing to die for it. What's inside?" Sienna hesitated. She had to give him something. "Proof," she said. "Proof that I didn't commit the treason they accused me of." Dante's eyebrows raised. "Treason? So you're a patriot on the run? CIA?" "Something like that," she evaded. "Volkov bought a hard drive containing the names of corrupt agents. My name was used to frame me for the theft. If I get that drive, I clear my name. If I don't, I'm a dead woman walking." Dante processed this. He circled her, studying her profile. "So you're a fugitive. Desperate. Lethal." He stopped behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "And you came into my club, disrespected me, and broke my wrist." "You grabbed me first," Sienna reminded him, turning to face him. "True." Dante's eyes dropped to her lips, then back up. The air in the room felt thick, charged with electricity. "You intrigue me, Sienna, or whatever your name is. You're not afraid of me. Most people can't even look me in the eye." "I've seen worse things than you," she said softly. "Have you?" Dante stepped closer, backing her up until her legs hit the edge of the sofa. "I can be very bad when I want to be." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. This time, she didn't strike him. She watched him. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. It was a possessive gesture, but gentle. "I could hand you over to the feds," Dante whispered. "I could make a call, and they'd be here in 10 minutes. "But you won't," Sienna said, her heart beating faster. Not from fear, but from something else. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because you hate Volkov more than you hate me. And because—" She paused, taking a risk. "Because you're bored, Dante. You're the king of Chicago, sitting on a high tower, and nothing surprises you anymore. Until tonight." Dante stared at her, stunned by her insight. She was right. He had been sleepwalking through his life of violence and power. She was the splash of cold water he hadn't known he needed. "You're dangerous," he murmured, leaning in. "I warned you." Their faces were inches apart. The tension was at a breaking point. It was a dangerous game. Predator and predator circling each other. Suddenly the elevator chimed. Dante pulled back, the spell breaking. He looked annoyed. The doors opened, and an older man walked in. He was dressed in a tailored suit, carrying a tablet. It was Silas, the Moretti family consigliere. Dante's most trusted advisor. "Forgive the intrusion, Dante," Silas said, his eyes flicking to Sienna with cold calculation. "But we have a situation. The police commissioner just called. He's asking about a shootout at the shipyard." "Handle it, Silas. Pay who needs to be paid," Dante dismissed, turning back to Sienna. "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Silas said, stepping further into the room. "They found a body, one of ours, and they found this." Silas held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a distinctive knife. Sienna's blood ran cold. It was her knife, the one she had in her boot. It must have fallen out during the fight. "This blade," Silas said, looking at Sienna, "is standard issue for a very specific shadow unit of the Pentagon. Unit 77. Dante looked at Sienna, his expression hardening. Unit 77? The assassination squad? Sienna stayed silent. "She's not just a spy, Dante," Silas said, his voice dripping with poison. "She's a cleaner, and I believe she was sent here to clean you." Dante froze. He looked at Sienna, the warmth vanishing from his eyes, replaced by the icy void of the dawn. "Is that true?" Dante asked quietly. "Were you sent to kill me?" "No," Sienna said, stepping forward. "Silas is lying, or he's wrong. I told you I'm here for Volkov." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Silas said smoothly. "And why would Volkov be meeting in our territory unless someone on the inside facilitated it?" Silas was twisting the narrative. Sienna realized with a jolt of horror that Silas wasn't just an advisor. He knew too much about the meat. "Dante, listen to me," Sienna pleaded. "He's playing you." Dante looked at Silas, the man who had been like a father to him, and then at Sienna, the woman who had broken his wrist and lied about her identity. "Luca!" Dante shouted. Luca burst in from the hallway. "Take her to the holding cell in the basement," Dante ordered, turning his back on Sienna. "Tie her down, and don't be gentle." "Dante, no!" Sienna yelled as Luca grabbed her. "He's the traitor! Look at him!" "Get her out of my sight," Dante growled. As Luca dragged her away, Sienna locked eyes with Silas. The old man offered her a small, imperceptible smile. She had walked right into the lion's den, and the trap had just snapped shut. The basement of the Moretti Tower was a stark contrast to the luxury above. It was soundproofed concrete, cold, and smelled of bleach. Sienna sat in a heavy steel chair, her hands zip-tied behind her back. Dante stood in the corner, in the shadows, smoking a cigarette. He hadn't said a word in 10 minutes. Luca stood by the door, arms crossed, waiting for the order to start the interrogation. "You're making a mistake," Sienna said, her voice calm despite the situation. "Check Silas's phone records. Check his offshore accounts. He knew where Volkov was because he's selling you out." "Silas has been with my family for 30 years, Dante said, stepping into the light. His face was a mask of cold fury. "He carried me when my father was shot. You? I met you 3 hours ago when you broke my wrist. And in those 3 hours I saved your life," Sienna countered. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have pulled you behind cover at the shipyard. I would have let the Russians turn you into Swiss cheese." Dante paused. That logic had been gnawing at him. It didn't make sense for an assassin to save a target. "The knife," Sienna pressed. "Silas said it was mine. Did you look at it closely? It's a Unit 77 blade, standard issue. My blade has my initials etched under the handle scale." "SBR," Sienna said. "If that knife doesn't have it, it's a plant. Silas bought a replica to frame me." Dante looked at Luca. "Where is the knife?" "Silas took it," Luca grunted. "Said he needed to log it into evidence." Dante's eyes narrowed. He took the evidence? Suddenly the heavy steel door creaked open. Silas walked in, flanked by 2 men Sienna didn't recognize. They weren't Moretti regulars. They moved differently. Mercenaries. "Dante," Silas said, looking surprised to see the boss still there. "I thought you went upstairs to cool off. I was coming to handle the prisoner." "I have a few more questions," Dante said, his posture relaxing, deceptively casual. "She says the knife is a fake, Silas. Mind if I see it again? Silas stiffened. The shift was microscopic, but to a trained eye like Sienna's, and a paranoid eye like Dante's, it was a scream. I locked it in the safe, Silas lied. It can wait. We have a bigger problem. Volkov is demanding a meeting. Tonight. He says he'll declare total war unless we hand her over. Then we hand her over, Dante shrugged. He walked toward the door. Luca, come with me. Let Silas prepare her for transport. Luca looked confused but followed Dante out. The heavy door slammed shut. Sienna was alone with Silas and the two mercenaries. The moment the lock clicked, Silas's grandfatherly demeanor evaporated. He sneered, pulling a suppressed pistol from his jacket. He didn't produce the knife. Smart girl, Silas whispered, walking up to her. You almost got him to think. Shame it won't matter. How much is Volkov paying you? Sienna asked, testing her bonds. She had been working on the zip tie with a friction technique for the last 10 minutes. It was almost ready to snap. Volkov offered me the city, Silas gloated. Dante is too soft. He has rules. Honor. Volkov understands that power is the only rule. We're going to kill you, dump your body in the river, and tell Dante you tried to escape. Then, at the meeting tonight, Volkov takes Dante out. And I take the throne. You talk too much, Sienna said. Snap. The plastic tie gave way. In a blur of motion, Sienna launched herself from the chair. She didn't go for Silas. She went for the mercenary on the left. She grabbed his wrist, redirecting his weapon just as he fired. The bullet hit the second mercenary in the leg. Sienna drove her elbow into the man's throat, snatched his gun, and rolled behind the heavy steel table. Silas fired wild shots, pinging off the metal. "Kill her!" he screamed. But before the remaining mercenary could move, the steel door flew open. Dante Moretti stood there, his own gun drawn, Luca right beside him. Dante wasn't looking at Sienna. He was looking at Silas. "You were right," Dante said to Sienna, his voice icy. "He does talk too much." Silas turned pale. "Dante, she got loose. I was listening at the door, Silas," Dante interrupted, walking into the room like the Grim Reaper. "I heard every word. Dante is too soft. Is that right?" Silas dropped his gun, falling to his knees. "Boss, please. It was a moment of weakness. Volkov forced me." Dante stood over the man who had been his father figure. He looked at Sienna, who was standing up, dusting herself off, holding the mercenary's gun with professional ease. "You wanted to know if I was tough?" Dante asked her. He turned back to Silas. He didn't yell. He didn't hesitate. He raised his pistol and fired a single shot. Silas fell. The betrayal was over. Dante looked at the mercenaries. Get them out of here. If they talk, they live. If they lie, they join Silas. Luca dragged the men out. Dante and Sienna were alone again. The tension this time wasn't hostile. It was electric. Acknowledgement. "You saved me again," Dante said quietly. "If I had handed you to Volkov, you would be dead by morning," Sienna finished, "and I'd be dead tonight." Dante holstered his weapon. He walked over to her, taking the gun from her hand and setting it on the table. He took her hands, checking her wrists where the zip ties had cut into her skin. His thumb brushed the red marks. "We have a meeting with Volkov," Dante said, his eyes burning into hers. "Silas said he wanted you handed over." "So let's give him what he wants," Sienna said, a cold smile touching her lips. "I'll be the Trojan horse." Dante grinned, and it was the most dangerous thing she had ever seen. "I like the way you think, Sienna. Let's go take back my city." The drive to the airfield was a study in suffocating tension. The convoy of 3 black-armored SUVs tore down the desolate stretch of highway leading to the abandoned sector of O'Hare, a graveyard for cargo planes and forgotten deals. Outside, the Chicago wind whipped against the bulletproof glass, a howling reminder of the freezing cold awaiting them. Inside the lead vehicle, the silence was heavy. But it wasn't empty. It was charged with the kind of electricity that precedes a lightning strike. Dante Moretti sat in the back seat, checking the magazine of his custom .45 for the 3rd time. He wasn't nervous. Dante Moretti didn't get nervous. But he was hyper-aware. Beside him sat Sienna. She was no longer the waitress in the starched uniform, nor the desperate fugitive in the alley. She was transforming before his eyes. She pulled the Velcro straps of a tactical vest tight across her chest, the sound tearing through the quiet cabin. She had raided Dante's private armory with the efficiency of a woman who had spent a lifetime preparing for war. On her hip sat a Sig Sauer P320, in her boot a fresh combat knife. Her hair was pulled back tight, exposing the sharp, determined line of her jaw. Dante watched her, fascinated. He had spent years surrounded by men who claimed to be killers, by women who claimed to be dangerous. But Sienna was different. She was a weapon that had been forged in fires he couldn't even imagine. "You're staring," Sienna said, her voice low, eyes fixed on the gleaming slide of her pistol as she racked it. "I'm admiring," Dante corrected. He reached out, his hand resting on her knee. The contact was grounding. Silas is dead, but Volkov doesn't know that yet. He's expecting a broken woman to be thrown at his feet. He's expecting me to be weak. Sienna looked up, her eyes meeting his. In the dim light of the passing street lamps, her irises looked almost black. "And what are you going to give him?" "I'm going to give him a show," Dante said, his lips curling into a wolfish grin. "But you're going to give him the finale." "Just get me close to the case," Sienna whispered. "I don't care about his money, his drugs, or his territory. I just want my life back." "You'll get it," Dante promised. His grip on her knee tightened. "But once you have it back, you might find you don't want the old one anymore." Before she could answer, the SUV slowed. The radio crackled. "Approaching the drop point, boss. Russians are set up. Heavy presence. I count 12 shooters, 2 snipers on the hangar roof." "Copy," Dante said. He looked at Sienna one last time. "Showtime." The convoy rolled onto the cracked tarmac of the private airstrip. Floodlights from the hangar blinded them momentarily, casting long, jagged shadows across the concrete. In the center of the light stood a massive Gulfstream jet, its engines whining with a high-pitched scream, ready for takeoff. Viktor Volkov stood at the base of the boarding stairs, wrapped in a thick wool coat with a fur collar, looking like a czar from a bygone era. He was flanked by a wall of muscle, men with AK-47S held at the low ready. They looked disciplined, cold, and ready to kill. The SUVs fanned out, creating a defensive semicircle. Dante waited for the driver to open his door. He stepped out into the biting wind, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his hands visible. He radiated an arrogant calm that seemed to infuriate the Russians instantly. "You're late, Moretti," Volkov shouted over the wind. "I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." Dante walked forward, stopping 10 yards from the Russian line. He was alone in the open, a perfect target. "I had some housekeeping to attend to, Victor. Taking out the trash takes time." Volkov's eyes narrowed. He looked past Dante to the SUVs. "Where is Silas? And where is the girl? Our agreement was specific. A life for a life." "Silas has retired," Dante called back, his voice carrying easily over the turbine whine. "Permanently. He sent his regrets, and a bullet to the brain." The color drained from Volkov's face. He realized instantly that his inside man was gone. His advantage had evaporated. The trap he had set with Silas was broken. "Then you are a fool," Volkov snarled, stepping back behind his guards. "You came here with 10 men against my 20. You have no leverage. I will kill you, take your territory, and find the girl myself." "You're not very good at math, Victor," Dante said, shaking his head. "And you're terrible at observation." "Kill him!" Volkov ordered, raising his hand. The Russian guards raised their rifles. The air crackled with imminent violence. "Wait!" A female voice cut through the tension like a whip. The rear door of the center SUV flew open. Sienna stepped out. She didn't look like a prisoner. She walked with the predatory grace of a panther, her tactical vest catching the floodlights, her hands empty and held out to her sides. "I'm the one you want, Volkov," she shouted, walking past Dante to stand at the front of the formation. Volkov signaled his men to hold fire. He laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "So the little waitress comes to die. You caused me a lot of trouble, girl. I'm going to enjoy making you scream." "I don't think so," Sienna said calmly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, black device. A remote detonator. Volkov sneered. "A bomb? You think wearing a suicide vest will scare me? My snipers will put a bullet in your head before your thumb moves." "It's not on me," Sienna said, a cold smile playing on her lips. She pointed a finger toward the sleek Gulfstream jet behind him. "It's on your ride home." Volkov froze. He looked back at the plane, then at Sienna. "You're lying. You haven't been near my plane." "Haven't I?" Sienna took a step forward, her voice dropping into the icy, professional cadence of an intelligence operative. 2 hours ago, while you were busy negotiating with a traitor in Dante's basement, I was already here. Your ground crew is sloppy, Victor. They didn't check the fuel truck. I planted 2 pounds of C4 on the rear landing gear strut, and another pound on the fuel intake. She held up the detonator, her thumb hovering over the red button. You try to take off, I blow the strut, and you cartwheel into a fireball. You order your men to shoot us, I blow the fuel tank, and we all incinerate together. So the question isn't whether I'm lying. The question is, do you feel lucky? The silence that followed was absolute. The wind howled, the engines whined, but nobody moved. Volkov stared at the jet, his $50 million escape route, and then at the woman he had dismissed as a nuisance. He saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't bluffing. She was prepared to turn this entire airfield into a crater. "You're insane," Volkov whispered. "I've had a bad week," Sienna replied dryly. "Now, the briefcase. Give it to me." Volkov looked at his guards. They were uneasy. They were paid to fight, not to explode. He looked at Dante, who was watching Sienna with a look of pure, unadulterated pride. "You lost, Victor," Dante said, stepping up beside Sienna, presenting a united front. "Give her the drive. Get on your plane, and pray she lets you leave. If you ever set foot in Chicago again, I won't use a bomb. I'll use a knife, and I'll take my time." Volkov ground his teeth, his face turning a shade of purple. He was the head of the Bratva, a man who commanded fear, and he was being checkmated by a waitress and a rival Don on a freezing runway. "Bring it!" Volkov spat to his second-in-command. The guard ran up the stairs, retrieved the silver aluminum case, and jogged back down. He placed it on the tarmac, halfway between the two groups, and retreated. "Go check it," Dante murmured to Sienna, keeping his eyes on the snipers on the roof. "I've got you." Sienna didn't hesitate. She walked forward, holstering the detonator but keeping her hand on her pistol. She knelt by the case, unlatched it, and flipped it open. Inside, nestled in black foam, was the encrypted hard drive, the object that had ruined her life, the object that would save it. She pulled a small tablet from her vest, plugged it in, and ran a quick verification code. Green text scrolled across the screen. Match confirmed. She snapped the case shut and stood up. She looked at Dante and nodded. "We're good," she said. Dante gestured to the plane. "Go, Victor, before she changes her mind." Volkov looked at them with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Moretti. The organization will hear of this. Tell them," Dante replied coolly. "Tell them Chicago is closed." Volkov spun around and marched up the stairs. His men scrambled after him, casting nervous glances at the landing gear. The moment the door sealed shut, the engines roared to full power. Sienna stood watching as the jet taxied rapidly, turning onto the main runway. She held the briefcase tight against her chest, her knuckles white. "Are you going to blow it?" Dante asked, stepping up behind her. His voice was close to her ear, warm against the cold wind. Sienna fingered the detonator in her pocket. She watched the plane pick up speed, lifting off into the dark sky. It would be so easy. One press, and the man who hunted her would be ash. She pulled her hand out of her pocket. Empty. No, she exhaled, the tension draining out of her body, leaving her trembling. I'm not a murderer, Dante. I'm a patriot. Or, I used to be. You're better than a patriot, Dante said. You're a survivor. The jet disappeared into the clouds. The airfield was quiet again, save for the idling engines of Dante's SUVs. Sienna turned to face him. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion. She looked down at the briefcase. I have it. I can clear my name. I can go back to DC. I can disappear. Dante looked at her. For the first time all night, the mask of the Mafia Don slipped. He looked vulnerable. Is that what you want? To disappear? Sienna looked at the bleak horizon, then back at the man standing in front of her. She thought about her old life, the cold apartments, the burn phones, the constant looking over her shoulder for a government that viewed her as expendable. Then she looked at Dante. He was dangerous, yes. He was a criminal, but he had stood in front of a bullet for her. He had trusted her when she had a gun to his head. My old boss tried to frame me, Sienna said softly. The agency turned its back on me. I never will, Dante said. It was a vow. He stepped closer, invading her personal space in the way that used to infuriate her, but now felt like gravity. He reached out and took the briefcase from her hand, handing it to Luca, who had walked up silently behind them. Put this in the safe, Dante ordered, never breaking eye contact with Sienna, and get the car warm. Yes, boss, Luca said, taking the case with a nod of respect toward Sienna. I have an opening in the organization, Dante said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. Head of security. Consigliere. Or maybe partner. Sienna raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk returning to her lips. Partner? That sounds expensive. I have high standards, Moretti. I can afford you, Dante replied. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her bottom lip. I'll give you the city, Sienna. I'll give you the world if you want it. Just don't leave. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. Dante didn't wait. He crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was possessive, hungry, and full of the fire that had burned between them since that first spilled drink. It tasted of danger and victory. Sienna wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, melting into the embrace. They stood there on the wind-swept tarmac, the king and the new queen of Chicago. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Dante rested his forehead against hers. Let's go home. Sienna smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. Home, she repeated, testing the word. It sounded right. She took his hand. Together they walked back towards the waiting cars, leaving the ghosts of their pasts on the runway behind them. The waitress was gone. The spy was retired. Sienna Blake was just getting started. And that is how Sienna Blake went from serving drinks to ruling the underworld. She thought she was just fighting for her life, but she ended up finding a love dangerous enough to match her own spirit. Dante Moretti learned that the toughest thing in his world wasn't a bullet or a fist. It was the woman who wasn't afraid to put him on his knees. They say behind every great man is a strong woman, but in Chicago, they say beside Dante Moretti stands the only person who can beat him in a fight. What did you think of Sienna's transformation? Did Silas get what he deserved? If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, action, and romance, please smash that like button. It helps the channel immensely. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you'll never miss a new story. Share this with a friend who loves a good mafia twist. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.